I held the forward watch on the Orient for 11 years before I ever saw a Vigil hull with my own eyes, and by the time it happened, I had drilled for that morning so many times that my hands knew the sequence before my mind caught up to it. Power up the long-range array. Silence the deck. Wait. My grandmother served the long watch before me. Her grandmother served it before her, back through 11 generations to the year they call the parting, when the Vigil folded their banners, called humanity unfinished, and left orbit without so much as a farewell transmission. They did not think we would survive them. That was the whole of their judgment, delivered once, never revisited. They took their doctrine, their ward blades, their titles, and they went out into the dark to find worlds more worthy of their attention. Earth did not chase them. Earth did not beg. Earth got quiet, and it stayed quiet for 12,000 years. And in that quiet, it built something the Vigil never once considered, a species that had learned patience the hard way, and never forgot the lesson. I grew up on the training floor of the Long Watch Academy, outside the Rift Basin shipyards, in a hall with a stone floor worn smooth by 11 generations of bare feet before mine. We didn't train there because it was efficient. We trained there because the discipline mattered more than the speed, and because every cadet needed to feel, under their own souls, how many people had stood in that exact spot before them, and asked the same question I asked at 11 years old. Why do we still practice a doctrine the people who taught it to us abandoned? My instructor never answered it directly. She only said that a lesson doesn't stop being true because the teacher stopped believing it, and that the Vigil had made the mistake of thinking their doctrine belonged to them instead of to whoever was patient enough to keep it. I didn't understand her then. I understood her fully the morning the array chimed. I was on the dawn shift when the array chimed. Not an alarm. The Orient doesn't do alarms for a first contact, hasn't for 6 centuries, because a startled crew makes bad decisions, and the Long Watch does not permit bad decisions. Just a soft double tone in my ear, and a cold certainty settling into my chest like ballast. Convoy signature, deep approach vector, said Tull, my second, without looking up from her station. Old drive harmonics. Real old. Matches the parting era archive profile within 4%. 4%. 12,000 years, and their ships still sang the same song. I gave the order to bring the Orient up out of low orbit and hold position over the equatorial line, where the sun would be at our backs, and their sensors would see us haloed in light before they saw anything else. Small mercy of geometry. I wanted them to understand what they were looking at before they had time to be afraid of it. They came in slow, the way old cultures come in when they still believe momentum is a kind of authority. 11 vessels, none of them large by our measure, all of them scarred with a make of armor plate we hadn't manufactured in generations because we'd found lighter ways to stop the same weapons. Their hulls carried the old ceremonial scoring along the prow, the same ritual markings I'd only ever seen reproduced in the Academy's archive plates. Real now, weathered by a journey longer than any of my ancestors had lived to see. Their lead ship hailed us in the old tongue, the ceremonial one, the one my archivist still taught cadets, so that if this day ever came, someone on this deck would understand every word of the insult before it landed. The voice that came through was measured, patient, faintly amused. First Warden Solvane, speaking for the Vigil Compact, here to assess the standing of a world left unattended for 12 millennia, and to determine what, if anything, remained worth reclaiming. Reclaiming, as if we were a garden gone to weeds, waiting for a gardener to come back and decide whether to till us under. I opened the channel and let him see the deck behind me. Not a throne room, not a show of banners, just working officers at working stations, disciplined and unhurried, the way the Long Watch had trained 14 generations of us to be unhurried in front of exactly this moment. Warden Solvane, I said, welcome back to Earth orbit. You'll want to look up before you look down. He did. I watched it happen on the feed, the exact second his optics tracked past the Orient's hull and found what was behind us. Not one warship, 40. Not old patterned hulls scarred with obsolete plating, but the newest keels the shipyards over the Rift Basin had laid, kilometers of them, running lights steady, weapons cold and unfired, because nobody on our side needed to fire anything yet. Behind the fleet, the orbital ring caught the sun and threw it back in a long, unbroken line, and behind that, past the Terminator, the shield generator lattice over the old continental cities pulsed its slow standby rhythm, visible even from here, as a faint blue net laid across half a hemisphere. I did not gloat. The long watch does not train gloating, it trains restraint, because restraint is the harder discipline, and the only one that survives contact with real power. I simply let him look, the way you let a man finish reading a letter before you ask him what he thinks it means. "This is not possible," Sylvain said, and for the first time, the measured patience in his voice cracked at the edges. "You were left with nothing, no teachers, no blades, no doctrine. We took all of it when we went." "You took your doctrine," I said. "You left your library." That was the truth of it. The thing his people had never once accounted for in 12,000 years of assuming we'd rot without them. When the Vigil pulled out, in their hurry and their certainty, they hadn't burned the archive towers, hadn't scrubbed the training halls, hadn't taken the old philosophy texts that argued discipline could be taught to anyone patient enough to sit with it. They'd simply walked away from all of it, the way you walk away from a house you're certain will fall down without you in it. We didn't let it fall down. We read every page. We argued over every contradiction. We built our own ward blades from their diagrams, and then built better ones once we understood the physics underneath the ceremony. 11 generations of engineers and archivists and quiet, stubborn officers had turned an act of abandonment into the longest apprenticeship in human history, and the only thing the Vigil had never planned for was a student who kept studying after the teacher left the room. Sylvain was quiet a long time. Behind him, on his own bridge, I could see his officers, young ones, most of them, born generations after the parting, raised on stories of a broken little garden world, waiting for its rightful stewards. I watched their faces do what faces do when a story they've been told their whole lives fails to survive contact with the thing it was supposed to describe. One of them, near the back of the frame, had stopped looking at his console entirely and was staring past the edge of the feed at something on his own screen. The shield lattice, I guessed, or the long unbroken line of the ring, with the particular stillness of a man recalculating everything he'd been taught to believe about his own people's importance. "We came to reclaim what was ours," Sylvain said finally, and there was no ceremony left in it. "Nothing here was ever yours," I told him. "It was ours all along. You just didn't stay long enough to find that out." I could have ended it there with force. 40 ships to his 11, and every officer on my deck knew it, and not one of them so much as reached for a weapons key, because that was never going to be the answer the long watch prepared us to give. We hadn't spent 12,000 years building strength so we could use it the way it had once been used on us. We'd spent it so we would never again have to. I gave the order to escort the Vigil convoy back out past the edge of the system, ship for ship, the Orient leading, our newest keels flanking wide enough to be seen without ever being close enough to threaten. No shots, no boarding parties, no confiscation of their old blades or their old banners, just a long, silent passage out through the dark. First Warden Sylvain watching his own archive-era hull crawl home past the proof of everything his people had failed to imagine. Before the channel closed for the last time, he asked me one thing, quiet enough that I almost missed it under the hiss of the old ceremonial dialect. "What do we tell the ones who sent us?" I thought about that for a moment, standing on a deck built by people who had never stopped waiting for exactly this question. "Tell them the garden kept itself," I said. "Tell them we were ready before they ever thought to ask if we would be." Then I watched his convoy fold into the dark, and I stood the rest of my watch in silence, the way every officer before me had stood it, keeping faith with a promise none of us had ever spoken aloud, but all of us had spent our whole lives keeping anyway.